Hello, and welcome to Acceptable Madness. My name is Scott McKinney, and today we're going to be talking about what is, I imagine, the bane of a lot of people's existence with depression or mental illness, and that's naysayers. And for those of you who don't know what that means, that's basically people who don't believe or, they object to or oppose that particular viewpoint. So they're the people out there that when you tell them that you are depressed or feeling depressed or having negative thoughts, they're the people out there that may think that for whatever the reason, but they may think that you're doing it for attention or that you're just being dramatic or that you're not actually feeling as depressed as you say you are. And throughout my time of existence, I've found that a lot of people are objectors, and there are a lot of naysayers out there for depression and other mental illness. And I'll actually give two examples that have been semi-recent, within probably 5 years. And I'll explain how these people felt about depression, and whenever, I explain that it's something that I struggle with, and how I reacted to it. So the first one I will use, or I will talk about is, I actually met someone that, so I mentioned the fact that I do this podcast. Acceptable Madness is my brand. I like talking about mental illness. I like writing. So inevitably, it's something that's going to come up in conversation. And this is a person that whenever we first met, we got along pretty well. And as we continued and, we pursued a friendship, the conversations towards depression, I don't want to say that they happen more frequently or anything, but whenever I talked about like my brand or of Acceptable Madness, there were always questions that followed it. And she actually, there were two different things that she said that was, as someone that does struggle with depression, very condescending and also completely outrageous and offensive even in some regard. And the first one that she said, well, I'll start with the more minor one, which is she said that she asked one day if I have ever paid for therapy, which is something that I have not done. The reason for that, there's a multitude of reasons. The first one is that I am recently out of college and cannot afford to just put down a bunch of money on sitting down and talking with someone. The other reason is I don't personally feel the need to do that because I find doing this podcast and stuff like that very therapeutic. And I don't feel the need. I'm very open and vulnerable with how I do feel about stuff, and there's not much for me to hide. So I actually feel like, for me, being this open and willing to talk about what's going on in my head has allowed me to make better relationships with the people that I do talk to on a more regular basis, whether it's my family, friends, girlfriend. And they're all basically therapists in their own regard. Like, they all help, they all listen, which is why earlier in this podcast I had an episode more about like friends and family and support systems and stuff like that. And it's because they're all very important. Now, I'm not saying paid therapy is bad. I'm saying that I've been able to find a way to get that kind of therapy without having to pay for it, which is something I ultimately wish on everybody. I hope everybody's able to get to that point where they have that kind of support system. But if not, don't feel bad if you do pay to see a therapist, because they're more qualified than anybody in my out of the people that I talk to, and they can offer very helpful advice if you actually need it. But she basically told me that because I had never paid for therapy, that wasn't enough to qualify me as depressed. She was trying to find some way to, I don't even know, validate the fact that I'm depressed. And validating it is already such a weird thing, because in my opinion, if someone says that they're depressed, you should listen. If they're doing it for attention, if they're maybe not feeling it if they're not feeling super depressed and they're not actually sure what it entails and they're not actually depressed, who is anybody to tell them that they're not depressed? The best thing that you can do is listen to them and help them through it. And if you're at a point where you're not mentally or emotionally stable or comfortable enough to do so, then all you can do is push them in the right direction. Because there definitely are people out there that may not actually be depressed, and when they talk about it or they say stuff, it's just for attention. And when that's the case, don't think of it as they're lying about having depression. Think about it as they're looking for a way to get this kind of affection and attention that they currently don't have. And maybe there's some more deep-seated problems around it that require a bit more effort than just going, they're not actually depressed, and I'm not going to waste my time with that. So, but yeah, it seemed as though she was trying to validate or find reasons, or that she's put these qualifications down that say, if you've done these, then you're depressed, otherwise you're not. And that brings me to one of the other things that she ended up saying, and that is that because I personally have never attempted suicide, I cannot be depressed. And clearly, that's absolute bullshit. Or another word, one of my favorite words is hogwash. It's one of the most uneducated things I've heard about mental illness. Because let me explain why that's such a negative comment to have made. Now, look, I know that I'm in a pretty good place for having depression, and I still have my good days and bad days, but I'm really in no danger of performing any self-harm. But there are people out there that aren't as comfortable with their depression and don't wear that vulnerability on their sleeve, and they haven't found a good way to cope with that. Now, say I had gone to this who I thought was a friend and told them that I was depressed, and she asked if I had ever attempted suicide, and I said no. And then she told me, then you're not actually depressed. That's the kind of negative response that is really indicative of that person showing that they, one, don't care very much and are kind of just pushing it off and not worrying about it. And two, that's a really dangerous thing to say, because what if in that current mindset, someone says, well, you're not depressed if you haven't attempted to kill yourself. What if the next thought is, well, shit, if that's the case, maybe people will listen more. Maybe I will be more validated if I do that kind of self-harm. Now, I would like to say very explicitly that you do not have to attempt suicide to qualify for being depressed. You shouldn't even think about it. I mean, clearly it's going to be a thought. It goes through my head all the time, but it's not something that I genuinely consider. And I mean, okay, it's a weird way to say it. Yes, sometimes, suicide comes to the brain, but it's something that I really work to not actually bring to any drastic decisions or actually act on it. Like, dealing with those thoughts is really, really hard sometimes. And, on a worse day, if someone told me that because you haven't attempted to kill yourself, you're not depressed, there's a lot of different actions that can become of that. And just please, God, never say something like that to someone. It's absolutely terrible. It is the most negative thing I've ever heard from someone that is very, very unempathetic. And it is something that I will remember about that person until my grave, and I will never forgive them for it, because it's just so closed-minded. And again, it's a relationship that I do not need in my life because of how unempathetic it is. Like, I want a good support system. I don't want anybody that needs me to qualify depression to them or for them. And it's ridiculous for me. So, I mean, you're going to come across a lot of people that will give similar reactions and comments like that. And believe it or not, the other example that I have, so that was an example with one person who clearly does not have a very great grasp on helping people with depression. And that's fine. Not everybody does. But I would much rather she didn't comment like that and potentially cause damage to someone else. Now, the next example that I have is one that may be a bit more strange, actually. So, I've never paid for therapy, but whenever I was in college, I went to see a personal counselor. And I mean, I'm already paying for tuition, so I guess you could argue that it's paid therapy, but it didn't cost any extra than just the tuition. And I went and I was meeting with this guy, and it was whenever I first started to understand that I had depression, because like whenever I was in high school and stuff, I knew that I had suicidal thoughts. I knew that I had these really intrusive things go through my head, but I never I never attached it to depression. So whenever I went to college in an area that is pretty dreary and has snow for like 9 months of the year, it happened really bad around like middle of the winter, December, January, right around there. And the easy thought is, okay, well then I must have seasonal depression. And that was my actual thought. And I was like, well, maybe it wouldn't hurt to go and see a personal counselor. So that actually happened in my freshman year. I decided that the weather's bad, I'm not feeling all that great, I should go talk to someone about it. Well, I did, and I told him that I thought it was seasonal depression and explained all that stuff. But I never completely opened up to a therapist, and I don't know if it was just because I never felt that type of comfort or I was just not ready to be vulnerable like that, but I never opened up completely. But what I do remember vividly, and maybe this is the reason I never opened up completely, is the fact that I was talking to this therapist, so qualified, has the degree, has gone through all the appropriate training, and I don't know if you need like a license or stuff like that, but you all of the training that goes into it. And I sat down with him, and whenever I explained that I thought I had seasonal depression, and then maybe it's more than that because I also kind of feel it in every month of the year, he explained that he, as a trained professional, didn't believe in depression just as a whole. He just didn't believe that that was something that really existed. And he said that instead of depression, what he believes in is people going through periods of grief. So, and that's basically it. And people react to it differently. And at first, I was inclined to believe him. He's the professional. He's the one that I came to for help, so he certainly knows more about the topic than I do. So I figured it was just seasonal depression. I took like vitamin D pills or whatever you need to counteract the fact that you don't see the sun for 9 months of the year. And just kept moving on with my life. But the more that I thought about it, the more that idea of depression not existing stirred in my head. And then the summer after my freshman year came, and I didn't feel any better at all. And I immediately was just like, there was just this flip of a switch, and I was like, wait a second, that doesn't even make sense. That clearly depression exists. And that is something that it's better to know about and be able to tackle head on than to just be told that it's not a real thing. Because whenever I was told that it wasn't a real thing, in that not as vulnerable mindset, I mean, it was like someone was just totally, they were a naysayer. They were totally just not agreeing or listening or really being a productive member in helping my mental health. And that's something that really did stick with me. Clearly, I mean, I'm talking about it now, but I think that that's part of the reason that I never felt comfortable opening up to that personal counselor, was if I did open up and I told him that, you know what, sometimes my life is going perfectly fine, and then this small trigger will happen and I feel like I'm about to kill myself. And sometimes whenever I'm feeling more emotionally unstable, it's a genuine consideration. I didn't feel comfortable telling him that because I didn't know what his response was going to be. If he could say, okay, clearly that's a problem. We should talk about it. What kind of things are triggering those thoughts? But I was always a bit afraid that he would say, well, I mean, don't overreact and don't be dramatic. life's going to happen. Get over it. And I know that sounds so weird to feel that about a personal counselor. And it didn't occur to me until way after I was done seeing this personal counselor how weird it was, or that maybe it would have been more conducive for me to see someone else. So it wasn't something that I acted on in the moment. But having a trained professional tell me that what I was feeling doesn't exist was lunacy. It made me feel very, very, it didn't make me feel better. That's for sure. And so it's weird to go through and meet these different people throughout my life that just don't have this kind of empathy or understanding, or seem to just not care about the actual thoughts going through my head. I know I've talked to a lot of people that either know someone with depression or have depression or anxiety or all that stuff, and a lot of them sometimes they will go and try to talk to someone when they're in a less positive mindset, and when they go to talk to them, you can go up to someone and say that you're feeling suicidal, and they will just totally disregard it and push it off. And it's crazy, because to me, as someone that's had those thoughts, I'm like, okay, if someone's genuinely feeling like they might kill themselves, or even maybe not even that they're on the verge of doing it, but that those thoughts are going through their head, well then fucking do something about it, and don't be an asshole. Like, listen to them and explain that no matter what, you're there to help them out, and they can come talk to you if they need to. But it's such a negative response to say something like, well, I've never thought about killing myself, so I don't really, it's selfish. And you'll hear that response from a lot of people that have never really had those thoughts, is if you kill yourself, it's selfish. Or having those thoughts is it's like a delusion, and you're overreacting and you're being dramatic and nothing's really that bad. And you'll hear all these people say these things that you internally, inside your head, you're rejecting all of it because you know that they're not right. And it's super important to really sit down, and whether you're with someone that does understand it or whether you're alone, it's really important to sit down and figure out what's going through your head. And having people consistently say that that's not true and that's not really happening, or blah, 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 all that kind of stuff, it sucks. And it's something that's really hard to overcome. So those are some of my personal experiences. But something else I wanted to talk about is the fact that, so naysayers, broad term, clearly, just people that don't, they might reject your beliefs or whatever. So if you tell someone that, there are two groups that are the most likely to be naysayers, in my opinion. And one of them is people that have never had depression or mental illness and never seen it firsthand. If those people haven't experienced it themselves, and they've never understood it or never really been with someone that has experienced it, it's very easy for them to go, you're just acting crazy. And when you tell someone that you're thinking about killing yourself, or maybe you should see a therapist, or maybe you should take some antidepressants, when you tell that to someone that's never experienced it, then they're not going to understand it, and they never really will. So there's a lot of stuff that can go into that. But what it will cause is the fact that sometimes there's a chance that someone with depression will go to someone that's never had it, and they just won't have the help that they need. The other group of naysayers, and this one, to me, is a bit shocking, but I absolutely understand it as well, is people who do struggle with depression and anxiety. The reason that I've come to realize a lot of people that do have, that do have depression are naysayers is because there's this constant thought that when you as a person with depression is feeling depressed, No one else understands you. And it's a thought that's gone through my head plenty of times. You know, you had a bad day at work or school, and there wasn't even anything that super significant that triggered it. Maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. But then you feel like you're on the verge of suicide. There's a point where you will stop believing that there's someone else out there that feels the same way as you, because your problems are your only focus at that moment. And what that leads to is, again, from my experience, and I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I don't mean to say that everybody without depression is a naysayer and everybody with it is the same. I'm just saying that these are common thought processes that are important to understand and to really make a conscious effort to avoid. So I have depression, and sometimes I get to a point where I'm in a bad state of mind, and someone else says that they have depression, and I don't necessarily fully understand what they're going through. And I'll never fully understand what someone else is going through, but you need to put in that effort to at least accept what they're going through and not just assume that they're doing it for attention or that they're weak-willed or weak-minded or any of that stuff. And again, it's something that everybody can fall into the trap of. It's really, really easy to think, well, these other people don't have the problems that I have because currently my problems are just monumental. So it's weird to say that there are two big groups of naysayers and they account the population of the entire planet. And that's where it really comes down to, again, as I will consistently say throughout this podcast, comes down to finding a support system, whether they have or don't have any sort of mental illness, that will believe you and understand it. So for the people out there that don't understand why suicide is ever a thought, and honestly, those people are not listening to this podcast, but it still might be helpful for the people that do listen to get a better understanding of why these people are thinking that, and maybe it'll help you understand your own mind. But so whenever I say, or whenever I think that, you know, I'm not in a good state of mind, I'm currently thinking about killing myself, and they think that I'm being overdramatic or too much. And selfish is a word that comes up very often when thinking about suicide. Well, the thought that always goes through my head is, one of the things that I feel very frequently about myself is that I am a burden to myself, to my family, to my friends, to basically everyone I've ever met, and that sometimes I just can't seem to do anything right. So whenever I have those suicidal thoughts go through my head, and I'm thinking like that, then it's the least selfish thing to think about suicide. Because if you commit suicide, if you no longer exist, then you're not a burden to anyone anymore. Now, I'm not saying that's the correct way to think about it. I'm saying that is sometimes how I think about it. I know that I have a great family, a lot of friends that very much support me, but it's impossible for me to not occasionally think that what I am doing and what I am saying and thinking, and so all of my actions and thoughts are somehow burdening someone, even though these are people that I've built relationships with. If they're my family for my whole life, if they're friends for a good part of it, and it's impossible to not get past those thoughts, especially on those really bad days that happen from time to time. So those people that haven't had those negative thoughts, they're thinking about themselves at that moment, as everybody does. And I'm not saying that's a problem, but they're thinking, if you kill yourself, then I'll miss you, your family will miss you, your friends will miss you, all these people will miss you. How could you do that to everybody? And then on the other end of that, the person struggling at that moment is thinking, if I kill myself, my parents' lives will be better, my friends' lives will be better, and everybody around me, their lives will be better. Neither of those are the correct way to think about it. If you kill yourself, you will create a long-lasting impact on everybody you've ever met. And not necessarily a good one. Hopefully you'd be remembered happily, but more hopefully than that, nothing negative happens to you before natural causes. So, as for the other side, if you do kill yourself, it's not selfish. You're not just thinking about yourself. It's just, I'm walking a tight line. I don't want to try to think that, I don't know. What I'm trying to say is that everybody thinks about it differently. But ultimately, the only thing that needs to be understood is that killing yourself is not okay. And you should not do it. And you need to find a support system that'll really try to talk you out of it if you are having a problem. And you should go to someone for help. And if that person tells you that you need to attempt suicide to validate your depression, or that because you've never paid for therapy it's not validated, or if you have had therapy and your therapist is telling you that it's not validated, fuck those people and find someone better. Because better people out there exist all the time. Sometimes it can be really hard to find them, but they are out there. So look. And I'm not saying you're not looking if you haven't really found that group. But it is something that is very, very, very important. There's always going to be people out there that say that what you're feeling isn't true and that you're overreacting. I know and you know that that's not the case. It's not an overreaction. It's just what your brain in depression kind of does to you. I'm not saying that makes it right, but it's just what happens. So understand that there will always be people out there who don't believe you. Those people suck. But there are people out there that do believe you and do very, very desperately want to help you. Because no one wants to see anything bad happen to you. So, that's like I said, I wanted to talk about naysayers because I know that there's something that everybody encounters, especially with mental illness. I mean, you'll find people that are naysayers about everything. I want to publish a book, and I feel like the whole world's out to get me and doesn't want that to happen. And, it's just a weird thought. But whenever it comes to depression, the last thing that you want to be is a naysayer. The first thing you want to be is a support system. And here's something I will say. So, I have a pretty good grasp on my depression, but I haven't always. And there have been times where people have reached out to me and they were looking for that comfort and they were looking for it. And before I was more comfortable with it, I wasn't personally comfortable or mentally able to do that without having it be a negative impact on myself. So if someone comes to you and they're looking for help, offer it to the best of your ability. But if it's going to negatively impact you and cause you more headache and heartache and more depressed thoughts, then the best thing to do is continue to be a resource, but focus on trying to make yourself feel better too. Don't let that other person consume all the time that goes into what should be going into your own mental health. Be a resource for people and help them, but know that a lot of the time, a lot of the thoughts that come with depression, the best way to overcome them is to just think about them yourself. And sometimes, most times, there's not really someone out there that's going to be able to tell you the right or wrong thing regarding it. There's so many conflicting thoughts regarding depression that it's a really personal battle. And understanding that is, I think, very important to dealing with it for the rest of your life. That's something I want a future episode of this podcast to be. Depression's never going to go away. Don't expect it to. But expect to, as you grow older, understand it better and know that you'll be okay no matter what. So, yeah, just to recap, a lot of people won't believe you. That doesn't mean that your depression and anxiety isn't validated. And if you think someone's just doing it for attention, still give them the time of day, because they might not be. And even if they are, there's something else probably going on with them. So, I wish you the best. And I'm excited to talk to you again next week. Bye.